So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today. Ellen Cerreta is the Associate Laboratory Director for Physical Sciences at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Her research focuses on the relationship between microstructure and dynamic materials properties. At Los Alamos, she has led several projects to investigate dynamic materials performance and provide insight towards advanced predictive capabilities for strength and damage in extreme environments. Since joining the lab in 2001, Dr. Cerreta has served as the division leader for materials science and technology, the deputy division leader for explosive science and shock physics, and the ALDW High Explosive Safety Program Manager. Dr. Cerreta received her BS in Aerospace Engineering from the University of Virginia, go Hoos, and her MS and PhD degrees in Materials Science and Engineering from Carnegie Mellon. She currently serves as president of the Materials, Metals, and Materials Society, is an adjunct faculty member in the Institute of Shock Physics at the Washington State University, and was inducted into the 2016 ASM Fellows class. So let's welcome Ellen Cerreta to the podium.
Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate that. And so for those of you who know that being at a national lab means you can learn, I still haven't learned that I need to wear something where I can attach the part of the microphone that has the clip. So I'm going to be a little clumsy and hold this. Before I get started on this presentation, I'm going to make two sort of disclaimers about the presentation so you can get a feel for what's about to get said. The first disclaimer is that the presentation is really sort of geared at both the people in the audience who have not yet begun a career at an NNSA facility, but maybe are considering that career, as well as those of you who are very, very early in that point in your career. So maybe you've perhaps already joined an NNSA facility, a DOE NNSA facility, and you're now really getting your feet underneath you. I hope that I'll provide you a few things that help make you think. The second is I'm going to try to do this holistically, being inclusive of our broad complex in NNSA. So giving attention to, specifically, my Livermore and Sandia colleagues, as well as the important work we do at some of the plants. But what you'll notice is that many of the pictures, in fact, probably all of them, are from Los Alamos, because it was easier for me to pull together a presentation with pictures from Los Alamos than trying to draw lots of pictures from other places. So please listen to my words and don't focus so much on the pictures. With that said, I'll sort of begin my presentation. So being from Los Alamos, you always begin with Oppenheimer. So I'm going to make that stereotype real. The one I will not commit, just like the speaker before me said she's not going to show an org chart. I seem to be almost incapable of giving a presentation without showing the materials tetrahedron for the material scientists in the audience. And so I promise you I'm not going to show a materials tetrahedron. But I am going to talk to you a little bit about the beginnings of the DOE weapons laboratory history. This year, Los Alamos turns 80, and this is certainly the beginning of what we know as the current DOE weapons program. I bring this up not so much to celebrate the history of Los Alamos, but because many of the decisions, investments, and vision that began 80 years ago at Los Alamos and around the country shaped the current facility. And so what's really important now is that the things that you're doing in this room, that programs like this are doing, the investments you're making in your time and in your career development are most certainly going to shape the lab at the lab structure, the plant structure, in 100 years, right? And so as we stand on our tiptoes and look over the horizon at what national security is going to need from science and engineering, it's the decisions and the vision that you have in this room that's going to shape how we're able to be responsive to that. Just the way 80 years ago and in the subsequent time and the time thereafter has shaped the capability we have today. And to that point, the mission of the laboratories and the plants is really threefold. Of course, it remains true to that vision that we had in our initial days with regard to the nuclear deterrent. But because of the capabilities that we have housed in these facilities, we really are able to be responsive to other national security missions requiring some of the best science and engineering to address these tough challenges. It goes without saying that the capabilities that we have are well poised to understand the challenges of global security, as well as be responsive to national security challenges, not just within the United States, but facing the entire world. So one way to think about what those capabilities are is to bin them into some categories. And while many of you who know the labs and the plants quite well will look at these categories and say, I think you might be missing some things, just sort of blur your eyes for a minute and believe I've captured most of this in these bins. The first bin that we have is really the realization of physics concepts and designs. We have the ability to understand a set of requirements we need to meet, flow those requirements down, and build not only the prototypes to address those kinds of physics needs, but also the advanced experimental platforms we're going to need to interrogate them. Most certainly, this is where we see things showing up like the platform development in NIF, as well as the technologies we're realizing today at the APS in terms of dynamic compression science. But moreover, this is where we also prototype new designs for our hydros, as well as what we examine on our firing sites. Next is maintenance. We have a major capability around maintenance, and that, I know, does not sound attractive. It sounds more like I'm maintaining an HVAC system. Of course, that's not what I mean, although that's important, and HVAC is making me angsty at home right now. What I really mean is the science of how you take systems that have very, very complicated, precise requirements and watch them age and ensure that they're going to work the way you intended them to. How do you extend lifetimes of systems? How do you extend lifetimes of materials? How do you do that without testing the full system? This is really a huge challenge, and this bins really under the category of maintenance. And this is an enormous partnership between the labs, the physics labs like Los Alamos and Livermore, the engineering labs in Sandia, and the plants. A tremendous amount of the maintenance and surveillance work, believe it or not, is being done with the plants. And those types of connections are so important to how we understand. And then finally, exploration and validation experiments. This is probably what many of you know us best for. These are the types of experiments that allow us to answer grand challenge problems about the way in which the physics and the materials behavior within many of our important systems serving that broad mission space that I described are behaving. This is really the center point of much of our model development, our code development, and the really careful experiments we need to perform to validate those models and codes. On that point, we've really developed a huge amount of capability amongst the laboratories for addressing that last piece of the puzzle, as well as the first piece of the puzzle with regard to hardware and prototype design. Of course, we have lots of small-scale facilities at all the laboratories and plants. And in fact, my own career was really focused on work in small-scale laboratories, much like the ones that I had at university. But a DOE lab is really known for its large-scale facilities. And the large-scale facilities, again, at an NNSA lab, kind of bin into two categories. Again, blur your eyes. I'm sure some of you can think of some facilities that don't bin in these categories. But for the most part, they bin into two: the manufacturing capabilities and the predictive and the validation capabilities. These capabilities are so important to the way in which we do our work, but also are a hallmark of the way in which we do our work. So what do I mean by that? What I specifically mean is all of these capabilities are interdisciplinary capabilities, multi-organizational capabilities that require decadal vision to achieve. And so a great example of that is what our colleagues at Livermore have been able to achieve recently with NIF. This wasn't an achievement that happened in 3 to 5 years. This was a decadal vision that took constant vigilance to realize this is what a national lab can do, is bring together people from across a laboratory as large as Livermore, across a DOE complex as large as NNSA, and systematically hammer away at all the challenges it takes to achieve something like ignition. This is why we have our facilities. But as I said in the beginning, the mission continues to evolve, and I'll focus on that deterrence mission. What many of you probably realize, but maybe some of you have not heard said emphatically, is when we ended underground testing, one of the things we committed to as a nation was that not only weren't we going to change the materials that we used in the stockpile, we weren't going to change the way we made them. So the reason we did that is because we said, we got a lot of underground testing data. We can use that to develop models and codes that help us remain predictive with regard to what the stockpile will do. And if we don't change any of the materials and the way we made them, we'll be able to validate the performance of the stockpile going forward without having to do underground testing. And so we spent the last 30 years doing just that. That's stockpile stewardship. And there have been tremendous achievements in that arena, right? And one of them is that we have been able to validate the performance of the stockpile doing just that. But fast forward 30 years now, there are a lot of reasons why we would like to replace materials in the stockpile. Some of them are just that there are better manufacturing capabilities. Some of them are that we're looking toward a future stockpile that may have different requirements. Some of them are just the ease of manufacturing and getting away from some very difficult supply chain issues. For a number of reasons, we would like to change those materials. And that is really pushing us into a different space than we have been for the last 30 years. From a materials standpoint, and I promised you I wouldn't show a tetrahedron, but boy, am I going to talk about it. From a materials standpoint, what that means is we've been hyper-focused on structure of a material to its performance, but we haven't spent a lot of time sweating from process to structure. And so our models and our codes are pretty skilled at predicting that structure to performance piece of how materials and component systems are going to behave. What we haven't put to the test is that process to structure piece to get the whole relationship from process to performance of a material in the really harsh, high demanding requirements of a weapons system. Now, the lucky thing is that we've had mission space in some other areas. That applied energy area I was speaking about before, that global security area, that's allowed us to flex our muscles in that processing space in a way that our nuclear deterrent has not. However, we're really putting all that know-how right now to the challenge, to the test of how do you qualify really new materials against potentially new requirements in these harsh, high-demanding spaces. The good part about that is not only do we have the experience that we get from some of our other programs to leverage, we have the ability to rely on some of the tools developed during stockpile stewardship. These really advanced predictive models that we have to have some faith are getting the structure to performance piece right, because that's how we've been validating the stockpile. But now we can leverage them to really pursue what it's going to take to accelerate qualification of new materials into harsh environments. We can do that by really not only building up our own capabilities at the laboratories, which are certainly going on right now. Livermore's Enclave facility, Sandia is looking forward to a next generation additive manufacturing lab that I believe is called Camino. Los Alamos is making massive investments in terms of their actinide processing capabilities, both in the Sigma complex as well as within PF4, and looking forward to new HE processing capabilities. All of these investments are super important, and then we'll be leveraging some of the capabilities that I spoke about before with regard to our small-scale science facilities and our larger-scale facilities like our firing sites, the Z machine, NIF, et cetera. And so this is really why I say to you, it's an exciting time to join the NNSA family. We really are looking at a very new challenge, different from what we have embraced in the last 20 years. And it's going to take the entirety of the scientific enterprise and the things that you are doing and learning right now to really help us be clever and creative in this space. So as I said, I would talk a little bit about some advice to give you and perhaps some networking opportunities to put in your back pocket. Up here is sort of my path to where I am now. You heard it in the bio. It's sort of a lot of detail, whatever. The point I want to make on this slide first is when you look at all the jobs I've held, besides maybe saying she can't hold down a job, what you might say to yourself is, gee whiz, she's been on a lot of interviews, okay? And the first thing that I will tell you is of all the questions I have been asked on an interview or statements that have been made to me in an interview, no one has ever once said to me, hey, Ellen, you published too much, all right? It is a privilege to work on science R&D and engineering R&D serving the national security. And it is a responsibility to the taxpayers that you have to document your scientific product. In many cases, this is open peer-reviewed publication. For others of you, it may not. It may be milestone reports, classified publications, but it is an absolute responsibility to document your work. And if you are not documenting your work, you are not living up to the other half of the deal. The second part I will tell you is you need to join your professional society. Now, some of you know that I was president of my professional society. This is not a plug for TMS. But what it is a plug for remaining connected to your profession. There are a couple things that this does for you early in your career. The first thing that it does is it keeps you networked with the way in which your profession is evolving, so that you really understand the lay of the land and are making sure that the most current and modern ways of thinking in your profession are brought back to your facilities. The other thing it does for you is it gets you a venue to see a lot of different leadership styles. You will stay plugged into leadership styles from industry, from academia, from other nonprofit types of organizations that support science and engineering. And for you, this will shape the way in which you actually shape your own leadership skills. And the third, which is definitely not altruistic, but is nonetheless true, is all of you are rising stars. And what's going to happen at some point is somebody like me is going to want to nominate you for pinnacle awards within your profession. And I'm not going to be able to do that unless you've had contiguous membership in a professional society for more than 5 years. And so all of those awards that you hear people get announced for in their bios, Fellow of APS, Fellow of MRS, et cetera, that comes because you were a loyal member of a professional society and viewed among the professionals within your rank as somebody who really had an opinion worth hearing. And being connected to your professional society gets you that stature. Another piece of advice that I might give is that we very rarely hire somebody at the NNSA labs who has every skill we need for the job we're hiring them for. And that was most certainly true for me. You heard my own work was in dynamic loading of materials and interrogation of structure and how it evolved under high pressure. Here's the secret. My thesis in graduate school was on creep, just about as far from dynamic loading as you can get. I was certainly not hired for my deep understanding of creep. I was, in fact, hired, though, because I understood electron microscopy, which was an important way in which we characterize materials in postmortem to dynamic loading events. What the lab did for me in my postdoc was taught me what I needed to know about dynamic loading to put those characterization skills to use. And so one of the things that I will encourage you to do is to deeply consider postdocing at an NNSA facility. You've already heard some of the bios of the people involved here today. There was a bio shown earlier by the speaker before me regarding somebody who had postdoced at one of the NNSA labs. I sat at breakfast with somebody who postdoced at an NNSA lab. I cannot tell you how valuable the time as a postdoc is. The postdoctoral program at the NNSA labs is a crown jewel in the NNSA crown. It gives you that time to learn these incredibly different areas of physics and science that we need you to understand during your time at a lab. And by the way, there are 3 successful postdocs. The first postdoc is the postdoc who comes to a laboratory, does their postdoc, and converts to staff. The second postdoc is somebody who has a successful postdoc and a good time and leaves the lab and goes off and says really good things about the lab. And the third postdoc is the one who has a good time, goes off, says really good things about the lab, and then comes back to me. And so those of you who have left me from your postdocs know I'm coming after you. Another important thing to know in your career, as you embark on your career or maybe are sort of getting your feet underneath you in your career, is there are many ways to access the national lab system. This is both important maybe for your own career as well as the people you want to network with who are outside of the laboratory system. One of them is the national security education centers that sit at each of the laboratories. These house an institute structure. Maybe one of the most famous is the Seaborg Institute, Livermore, Los Alamos, Sandia. I think Oak Ridge is setting up a Seaborg Institute. Lots of the labs play in this space. These institutes are essential for drawing in collaborations, particularly with university, to promote relevant multidisciplinary technology and innovation. These are the way in which we bring in faculty fellows, many of our students, and provide that up and out piece that's so important to collaboration. Another way to access the labs is through our user facilities. Many of the labs have multiple types of user facilities. In fact, these are very, very Los Alamos-centric. CINT is a facility at Los Alamos where we have the Gateway facility. The core facility is actually at Sandia. It's the Center for Integrated Nanotechnologies. The MAG Lab is actually, if you can believe it, an NSF facility that sits at Los Alamos, partnered with Florida State University. But additionally, we have NNSA user facilities like NIF and LANCE, where we have proposal calls and a broad net is cast with regard to who can do research at these facilities. And that includes our university and industry partners. And then finally, there are lots of different career paths at an NNSA lab. I mentioned some of them here. A lot of you think of us for our research career paths, but of course there are management roles with regard to line management, like myself, as well as program management, who many of you have come into contact with in your time here at a review like this. There are additionally important technical support roles. This bridges into things like understanding what it is to create a safety basis for criticality, how you really think about what it takes to provide MCNA support, so material control and accountability kinds of things. And there are many ways to look at how to research these capabilities. And I'll show you that for LANL, but I promise you Sandia and Livermore have very similar systems in place. So for Los Alamos, you can look at this website. And when you do so for Sandia and Livermore, which have a very similar website, what you'll find is information regarding all our open positions, exactly how to apply, the different types of career paths, and very importantly, information regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. We also have robust student programs at each of the laboratories. These things include our undergraduate student programs, our graduate student programs, our post-baccalaureate, and our postmaster's programs. These are incredibly important to our succession planning, just as the postdoc program is. And there's important information about things like salary structure, et cetera. That's the Los Alamos site. Again, Sandia and Livermore have their sites as well. And then finally, as I promised, I told you a jewel in the NNSA crown is our postdoctoral program. There's really important information with regard to the postdoctoral programs on each of the lab's websites. These are really important with regard to expanding what you already know. There are prestigious fellowships to be won with regard to these programs, and some of them here are pictures of previous Agnew and Metropolis Fellows that are sponsored by NNSA funding at the different labs. And so I highly encourage you to become educated about the postdoctoral program. I was a postdoc at Los Alamos, and so of course I think that that's a great way to go. But for those of you who aren't certain, please talk to people who have done it, because I will tell you it was one of the more valuable research experiences I had in my career. So a few final thoughts. The current NNSA mission continues to evolve, and the investments you're making are going to be critical to the challenges that we have coming. And so I'm so eager to see so many people in this audience, because this tells me we're getting it just right as far as preparedness. There are multiple access points to the NNSA labs, and so I hope you yourselves are able to use some of those access points. And then also consider how, as you cast your broader network of colleagues, how you utilize those access points to draw them in to be part of our broader network of capability. And finally, I'll leave you with my information. With that, I probably spoke too long, so okay. And I'll take any questions.